Today I want to talk about two related topics: pushing your boundaries and flirting with burnout. The reason I'm choosing to speak about this now is because it's something that I'm living right at this moment and have been living for several months and will continue to do so for the next few months or even a year. So the situation is this: there are two really big things going on in my professional career at the moment. So one of them, without going into too much details, is we are trying to put together a proposal for a major national and internationally relevant center of research in a research area that is close to my heart. This involves huge amounts of efforts, hundreds of meetings, talking to hundreds of researchers, industry partners. It's consuming a massive chunk of my life, both time-wise and energy-wise. It's one of those opportunities that I'm super excited to lead, but it's also one of those opportunities that only comes around once every few years. And so it's something where we have to do it now, otherwise we may not get a chance for quite a while. and so that's really taking up a lot of my time. The other thing I'm working on is a tech translation piece, and again, this is probably the best opportunity I've had in my entire 22 decades of research to try and do something where we can translate a tech into widespread deployment that potentially billions of people could benefit from on a daily basis. And again, this is something I'm incredibly excited about, and again, it's something that's consuming a huge amount of my best time and best energy and best thinking time. Now, both of those opportunities in terms of sticker values on likelihood of success or acceptance are very low. So the initial thing I talked about, the sticker likelihood of acceptance is about 10%, 1 in 10. And the other initiative to really reach its maximal impact is potentially superficially even lower than that. Now, of course, I'm only doing these things because I genuinely believe we have a much better chance of being successful. But nevertheless, these are initiatives that will have a huge amount of effort put in by me and many other people over a sustained period of time, and they could very well not meet their original goal. And so that puts a huge, I guess, emotional and psychological burden on myself, but also a lot of other people who are a big part of these teams or these bids or these initiatives. So I want to talk about the relationship to this and trying to manage the risk of burning out, because this is a situation where these are not externally imposed challenges. These are opportunities that were optional for us to go after and that we've chosen and embraced to go after with full gusto. And so that's a particular type of situation where your professional career can get incredibly busy and very stressful, but it is a conscious decision. So this is a bit different to those sort of challenges that come up along the way that you also have to deal with and that can also be stressful. Now, the rule of thumb here is that everything is relative to what you've done before and what you're comfortable with. So no matter where you're at your career stage, if you want to grow and expand your boundaries and capabilities and pull off bigger and bigger things, you're going to have to take risks and you're going to have to push your boundaries well beyond what you're experienced with and what you're particularly comfortable at. That is the nature of growth. Growth is often painful, goes in unexpected directions, but you have to do this periodically if you want to keep growing professionally. Because this is a conscious decision or a scenario where you're consciously choosing to do this, there is the possibility of planning a little bit ahead, trying to mitigate the risk of burning out and trying to take some particular preemptive actions to reduce the load on you. So a classical mistake many academics or high performers make is to try and not let go of control over anything. So in these situations, that's not very helpful because essentially you'll break. And so what you can do is you can try and delegate refer things, transfer responsibilities to other people, and also say no to a lot of things that you would normally say yes to. Now there's some prerequisites here. First of all, you have to have a network or team or resourcing where that's even possible in the first place. Second of all, you need to have a pretty good relationship with a lot of those other people for them to be willing to support you for a limited period of time and take on that extra load. But the flip side of that is you can't really delegate or offload everything. And so you're still going to typically need to maintain a lot of your core activities while you're pursuing these highly risky, all-consuming big things. And that can be very challenging. The only scenarios, I guess, where that wouldn't be the case if it's a complete career shift or change. For example, leaving academia, 100% leaving academia, cutting all ties to do a startup. But that isn't the current situation that I'm talking about in this video. The other reason in this scenario why you want to maintain some of your core activities is unless you're throwing all caution to the winds, you do want to have some sort of plan B. And this is always the tension that you face in such situations, which is going all out for the big things, the risky things that you're pursuing versus balancing having some sort of backup plan. Now there's always going to be compromise. So if you're really going full bore on these opportunities, the backup plans are going to be compromised to some extent because you're not going to be focusing on those activities. And again, this is going to come down to your personal circumstances, personal risk appetite, and also your general level of financial and career stability, depending on your particular circumstances. So what is the experience like? So I've been through this sort of phenomena a small number of times in my career. And although it's the ultimate vanity to compare yourself to an elite athlete, I would compare it somewhat to the concept of peaking, which is a concept that's very common in athletics and sporting endeavors. And this is where people deliberately focus and try to peak in terms of their performance and output for certain periods of time. And this is very different to just trying to do your best at all times. This is where you're deliberately building up some reserves, building up some energy reserves, emotional reserves, etc., so that you can afford to push really, really hard, well beyond your normal limits for a limited period of time. Of course, in academia, one of the jokes is that academia is so stressful and such hard work that a lot of people are just constantly pushing all of the time. But the reality is you can't perform at that maximal peak level all of the time. It ends up just smoothing out to sort of this average level of performance. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about deliberately committing to and peaking for a period of, say, a few months to maybe a year and a half. And that's something where you can legitimately perform at a much higher level. And if you've done this before, it is amazing to sort of sit back and monitor how you're going, because you will be amazed at how incredibly prolific and productive you can be for limited periods of time when you really, really focus on one or two core big important things and prioritize those things above just about everything else. Another key aspect here is in your personal life. You cannot do this if your personal life is in shambles, or if there are a lot of extra responsibilities, for example, significant carer responsibilities, perhaps you're helping a friend get through a difficult time. These sort of things are incredibly important, and you will not be able to be efficient at those things. So a lot of those things you just have to turn up and spend significant time with the person or be available at strange hours. And so pushing really, really hard at something professionally is not completely incompatible with significant things going on in your personal life, but it does make it what is already a challenging thing even more challenging. And so I guess taking these things on when you're in a relatively good place personally, if you can pull that off, is always ideal. The flip side of this is things can and always change in your personal life, and you have to be prepared for the fact that even if your big thing is going really well, if something really serious happens in your personal family life, then you're just going to have to pull the plug. And that is always a distinct possibility and does happen reasonably frequently. So it's just something to be mentally prepared for. So I talked about how it's amazing how much you can peak in terms of performance when you really prepare for and commit to a limited period of time doing one or two really big things which are your core focus. There are some downsides to this as well. So you tend to get into this hyper-productive, hyper-focused groove. And one of the things that becomes more challenging, especially if you have any sort of leadership role or any role that involves a lot of people interaction, is context switching can often become much more difficult when you are so hyper-focused. So if you are pitching a grand vision for a technology or an initiative that could potentially change the world, switching to having the emotional depth and nuance and patience to deal with typical sort of issues that would come up in terms of people management, that can be really, really tricky. That context switching can be very, very challenging, and it's something that you have to be extra careful about. The other thing that can happen is if you are really pushing really, really hard on an initiative, you may inadvertently become a little less patient for things that you normally would have had the time to deal with in other parts of your professional career. And again, this is something that you can mitigate by being hyper aware that this could be a problem. And it's also something where asking and sanity checking with your peers that you trust, can be very valuable, because you can be so much in the groove that despite your best intentions, you miss simple signals or make clearly bad decisions. And so sanity checking with other people, especially in these periods of high focus, can be really helpful. Once you've been through a few of these peak focus, peak performance type periods in your professional career, it does get a little bit easier to navigate each new one as it comes up. So part of this is just experience. So while no experience will be the same, if you've pushed yourself to your absolute limit and maybe beyond that a few times in the past, you have a database or a library of experiences that you can look up. And so you'll have a lot more familiarity with feeling stressed, feeling overwhelmed, feeling elated and incredibly excited, and all those various emotions that you'll go through. You'll have a much better feel for pacing. You'll know whether, when you feel tired and worn out, whether you should actually stop and take a break, or whether this is a feeling you can, if necessary, sustain for another week with little sleep, because that is what is needed to give the big thing that you're focusing on some chance of success. So you'll be able to pace yourself a lot better the second or third time you do this than the very first time you go through an experience like this. Now, of course, all of these big pushes, these big things that you try a few times in your career, none of them are usually all or nothing. So even if you miss the original grand goal or outcome that you're hoping for, there are of course always side benefits. So there's experiences along the way. You might gain a lot of skill sets, you might gain some new perspectives that you didn't have before, or your idea or initiative may pivot in an unexpected direction that is nonetheless exciting and fulfilling for you. So it's not all or nothing, and there can be benefits, and you should keep an eye out for those benefits. But at the same time, I don't want to undersell the huge emotional energy commitment and psychological commitment to doing something, especially high-risk things where it's highly likely that you will miss or not meet the original intended goal of what you set out to do. That's something that I think we could do better at supporting people in academia to do. I'm in an incredibly privileged position to be able to do that, but it's taken me 20 years to get to that position, and I've been very lucky along the way. And so it is a huge, huge deal, and it's not something that people can do lightly. If you haven't really had the chance to do one of these high-risk pushes in your career, I definitely encourage you to keep an eye out for it. As I said before, I wouldn't recommend doing this regularly unless you are an adrenaline junkie or you are in a secure position with very little responsibility to other people or groups. But it is something to keep an eye out for and to look for the right opportunity to really give it a crack. It's very different to big pushes that are highly likely to succeed. So for example, if you're a PhD student, finalizing your PhD, whilst incredibly hard and incredibly draining for many people, is something that most people will ultimately finish successfully. It may take a little longer. But that's very different to putting all of your effort and focus onto something that is a high risk, high return type thing, where statistically speaking, most people will not get anywhere near the original intended outcome or goal. And that's a very different situation to deal with psychologically. It's a very different situation to deal with pragmatically in terms of how you balance it with the other stuff going on in your professional and personal life. But it is an exhilarating ride. While you're in the middle of that ride, take a moment every now and then to step back and sort of observe what you've been going through, think about how exciting it is, think about the so unique experience that you're having, and really appreciate the ride for what it is, instead of it being entirely just about the end outcome. Anyway, I just wanted to share some of my personal experiences because they're particularly topical to me at the moment. I'm going to do my best to not burn out in this current big push, but I thought some of the experiences that I've had and I've seen in other people go through would be of interest to some of you.